Welcome to my dad's car. Enjoy!
Welcome to My Dad's Car, a podcast discussing our personal relationship with automotive nostalgia. And you know what? It doesn't even have to be about your dad's car. It can be your mum's, your grand's, your parents', guardians, or even a neighbour's. If it made an impression, let's talk about it. Hello.
Can't hear you. How's that?
Oh, that's better. Lovely.
How are you doing? All right, Andy?
Yeah, we're okay. Anything exciting to report?
The wife went to the gym last night and she came back and said, oh, there's a light that's come on in the car. Ah, great. Service light.
Yeah, we've got one of those at the moment.
Just getting in the mood for Christmas, aren't they, I think? They're still the street lights.
Goodness, yeah. So
I took it into the garage this morning and spent about an hour there whilst he had it plugged in. And
what is it, wrong air freshener, something like that?
Something like that, Andy, yeah.
Bit of tape on the dashboard.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you for joining us, Charles. How are you doing?
Yeah, not too bad, thanks. All good. It's a Friday. Could be worse.
Indeed. Oh, let me introduce you to my friend John.
Hi, Charles.
And for the benefit of the tape, Charles Clegg from Custodian.
Great to be here. Thanks for including me.
Yeah, we reached out to you. I've been following kind of your journey for a while, really. I signed up, I think, off the back of an Instagram thing a year or two ago. And I just thought this is kind of an interesting concept, tracking kind of vehicles and sort of the history and documents and everything. Do you want to give us a quick rundown on what Custodian's all about?
Yeah. So really back in 2019, my lifelong obsession has always been around cars from day zero of my life. And weirdly, I'm probably third generation of my family car guy. My grandfather built race cars in the 1920s.
Oh, wow.
My dad's raced a bunch of different cars. And I've lived and breathed this community my whole life. And back in 2019, I had a bunch of different classic cars and I raced a couple of them. And I suddenly realized that the more cars you had, or if you own something specialist, it's very difficult to own it. The ownership experience was not fun. And every other part of my life has some technology, but for car ownership, there wasn't any technology to help out. So I thought, okay, if we can solve some of these ownership pain points with some cool technology and actually help people in the community out, then we can have a cool business. And that was really the foundations of what grew into Custodian. So, we now have over 34,000 users with all sorts of awesome cars, ranging from a McLaren F1 to modified MX-5s, Mark 1 Golfs, a lot of modern classics.
Yeah. And
the nice thing about our business is that you can use all our tooling completely for free, because the way we make our money is actually one of the pain points, which is insurance.
Yeah.
So, not only can we get you a good deal on your insurance, and really fundamentally, I was solving my own pains. I remember back in 2019, the invoices would sort of come in. I didn't have a print in my flat. I never printed them out. I was missing MOTs and services just because there was so much admin. I thought things could be so much better. And it was actually causing more stress than it was worth. And fundamentally, this passion for cars, it should be all about enjoying them, not stressing about have you missed an MOT or a service, or having to sort out your insurance. And that's really what Custodian is all about. It's about caring for these cars, making sure that we can engage with the next generation of car collector, particularly people, the kind of younger generations who expect there to be an app, expect there to be technology, and really sharing that passion that we all have with making it more accessible to people that don't maybe have the network in the industry to look after these cars. So, that's where it's going to be. We also launched a marketplace. So we now have our ownership tooling, and we have our marketplace as well. So you can buy and sell specialist cars through our platform. And we're just launching right now our insurance product as well. So we're trying to be the holistic ecosystem for car nerds like myself.
Fantastic. Well, yeah, it sounds like you've got some busy times ahead of you as well. So
well, it keeps me off the streets, so, and it's fun. It's one of the things working in a world which I love, and as you know, all the people in this community are deeply passionate about cars. It's just such a joy. Obviously, starting any business from scratch, and we started building this during COVID, and we launched it back in August 2021. There's always stresses and there's always things that you're pushing to try and achieve, but when you're doing it in such a passionate community, it's a real joy, to be honest.
Indeed. Well, thank you for the quick rundown. And I guess we start all these exactly the same, really, with what's your earliest motoring memory?
Wow, that's interesting. I know the story, which I'm not sure I remember it, but my parents always tell it to me, so it feels like I remember it.
Yeah.
And that was once I was being pushed down a road in central London, and in a pushchair, I was a toddler, and I looked over, and a Bristol 401 pulled up and parked. And from my pushchair, apparently I said to my mother, "Look, mummy, there's a Bristol 401," as the guy was getting out. And apparently this guy, he very nearly had a heart attack. It's like, there's a toddler that knows what a Bristol 401 is. And he couldn't believe it. So I think I think this guy nearly keeled over. And the reason being is that my mother had a Bristol 603 for 20 something years as an everyday car in London.
Okay.
And so I kind of, growing up, I was often in the back seat of her Bristol 603 before, unfortunately, it met a rather unpleasant end in that it caught on fire and burnt to a crisp.
Oh no.
Jeez.
In Knightsbridge, actually, it evacuated 2 restaurants, I think 4 shops, 3 fire engines, and
Quite literally went out in a blaze of glory then.
it went out. In fact, the funniest thing about that story was that, well, there's not many funny things about the story, but the kind of funny thing about the story was it'd just been serviced. It should have been on good form, and it came back, and my mother parked outside her shop that she has in Knightsbridge, and my father had to run in to go get something. She was in the car. She said to my father, "Oh, it's a bit strange. It's smoking a little bit." And he said, "Oh no, it's just burning off a bit of oil. It's absolutely fine." Anyway, that little bit of smoke turned into more smoke. Smoke turned into flames. Those flames turned into 10-foot flames.
Jeez.
And then obviously they evacuated the street. The fire brigade came, and whilst it was on fire, the engine weirdly started. It started itself. It must have short-circuited or something, and it was like the car was haunted. And I think what had actually happened is the steering fluid reservoir, something had come loose. It sprayed onto the manifold, and boom, it went up. So that was luckily my mother was out of the car, so she wasn't part of that inferno. But it was quite a dramatic end to, I think, 23 years of Bristol ownership. Yeah, that was her first and her last Bristol. Though I absolutely love them. So I'm not slandering Bristol. I think they're fantastic.
Wow, that's quite something, isn't it?
Yeah.
What do you think your sort of earliest recollection maybe that you can actually remember? Because we've spoken about this before. Obviously, if you flick through sort of family photo albums and everything, you start sort of impregnating your own memory, don't you, with sort of the photos you see, and there's sort of a cross line between whether it's your sort of memory in your head or whether it's you've sort of taught yourself that was your earliest memory.
Well, one that's definitely like very ingrained in my psyche is definitely so my father bought a Ferrari 328 GTS.
Wow.
Back in the 80s, and I remember it doesn't really have back seats. My parents used to sit in the main seats, and I used to sit behind. There was like a little a kind of area behind the seats, but you weren't supposed to. I used to squeeze in there, and I remember they only had one cassette, which was Paul Simon Graceland.
Amazing.
And ever since then, that's been my favourite album.
Nice.
And I think I must have been super, super young. And that's just, even to this day, Graceland, Paul Simon, partly because, I always remember those times as, I don't know how old I was, super young, bombing along with my parents, and I was stuck behind the seat on this kind of parcel shelf, holding on for dear life.
It's probably like an umbrella shelf, isn't it, really?
But I remember another memory, I was probably 4 or 5 years old, in that same car. It was wet, and we were going around the Oxford Ring Road. My father was going quite quickly. I'm not sure I should tell this story publicly, but it's too late now. And he just got it slightly wrong going around a roundabout. He spun it twice, and straightened up, didn't hit anything, absolutely fine. And he turned to me, this was like shock silence, said, "Whatever you do, don't tell your mother." And that was it. That was it. And I don't think she never found out. But she might find out now if she listens to this. But there we go.
What colour was the Ferrari? Did he go for Rosso Corsa?
No, it was actually grey.
Nice.
Which was quite unusual. I'm a big fan of non-red Ferraris. I like any car in a quirky colour is for me more interesting. I like greens, blues, browns. The weirder and wackier the colour, I think the more interesting. I think a red Ferrari is a bit cliche for me, but
it's quite bold, isn't it? If you've saved up kind of the amount to buy one, there must be such you kind of get to filling out the sheet, and you're like, should I just go for red, play it safe? Had your father had Ferraris before, or was that kind of a first foray into? I
think that's the only Ferrari I ever had. But the other car, which definitely I have a huge amount of memories and affinity, is old Range Rovers, like the classic style Range Rovers.
Okay.
And as a kid, like doing a lot of journeys with my family, and they had the armrests in the back seats.
Yeah.
And my father had an LSE Range Rover, I remember, in the early 90s. And in the back, you not just had the armrests in the middle, but you had an armrest on the left. And there's like a 5-year-old, it was like being on a throne. You had your arms right down. And ever since then, I've had quite a few different classic Range Rovers. And I think, again, it's these early memories, which I think really, maybe subconsciously, go into your mind. And I have this weird obsession with classic Range Rovers as a result, even though they're pretty unreliable. They're a bit of a nightmare to own. They rot. but I love them. And I think that's probably something to do with those days 30 years ago.
Yeah, definitely. Any particular journeys you recall, the kind of family holidays or whatever, either, maybe in the Range Rover? I guess you weren't holidaying in the Ferrari.
That's a good question. I just, there's endless long journeys in the back of the LSE Range Rover, enjoying the extra legroom. I'm trying to think of any specific journeys.
Any cassettes in that one? Was it still Paul Simon, or did they have something else in that one?
I think they also had Paul Simon, but Big Country was another one, which is quite a niche band. I remember one big incident we had in the LSE Range Rover was going across a bridge in London, and I think again I was probably pretty young at the time, and we were going towards a zebra crossing, and there was a person walking along the kind of sidewalk, and before the zebra crossing, he looked left and just stepped out in the middle of the road. And he didn't look right at all. As my father jammed on the anchors, and it had ABS, that car, and it managed to stop just in time. He must have missed him by probably an inch, this guy. And he just didn't look at all. Anyway, the car behind us came to the back of us. The car behind that came to the back of that. The car behind that came to the back of that. And because my father had the tow bar on this car, there's barely a scratch on my father's LSE Range Rover. The car behind was written off. The car behind that was written off. I think the car behind that was even written off. But literally, there was barely a scratch. What had actually happened was the guy that stepped out, he was from Paris, he was French, and he was used to cars coming the other side of the road. So he looked left, thinking that they were coming from the left.
Yeah.
But actually, obviously, they were coming from the right, being the UK. And so he stepped out. So the poor guy was incredibly apologetic. But weirdly, because of the tow bar, and this is a top tip if you live in London, fit a tow bar to your car, because A, if you have a crash, it saves you, and also B, bad parking. People are going to hit your tow bar before they hit your bumper. That was definitely another memory of that car. Probably not a good memory, but yeah, certainly something that's stuck in my mind.
That sounds like a complete nightmare for the insurance companies to trawl through that one, doesn't it?
It's a weird turn of fate that I'm now launching insurance products, maybe to solve these sort of problems with the team here.
The tow bar's a funny one, isn't it? Because that's the first thing you discard, isn't it? You find a one-owner vehicle that's been cherished. You're like, oh, that tow bar can go. We'll tidy that up. But it could just save it.
Yeah, I've always thought one of the coolest things, if you get a car which shouldn't have a tow bar and you fit a tow bar to it, and there's a guy who races a pre-war Bentley, and he also has a Group C car, and he's fitted a tow bar to a vintage Bentley, and he tows his Group C race. I think it's a Porsche 962 or something like that. It's a Group C Porsche behind his 1920s Bentley.
Oh wow!
And I'm like, how cool is that? I'll send you the photo. It's peak cool.
Fantastic. So your parents' choice, I guess you mentioned Range Rovers, has probably had some sort of influence over the vehicles you purchased?
Oh, yeah, definitely. So I think, I think definitely the classic Range Rover, that's a horrid masochistic interest of mine now. And
they do look great though, don't they? I do think the older ones are now looking, I've seen us sort of travelling an older one and something modern. I think they look really good.
Yeah, I had an LSE as my everyday car for quite a few years. In fact, twice over the last 10 years. And I had one quite recently until they brought in ULEZ. So I had an LSE, again, maybe it's for sentimental reasons. And when they brought in ULEZ, it was £15 a day. I was like, I'm not paying £15 a day for that. So unfortunately I sold it. But I just like the design. They're such a classic design, very comfortable, particularly along with the LSEs. And you've got so much legroom in the back. It's like being kind of chauffeur-driven car in the back. And but obviously the air suspension was pretty temperamental. When they go wrong, it's quite embarrassing. In fact, I was driving back from Good of Revival one year, and my car filled up with stuff and parts, and I'd been racing down the Revival, and the air suspension packed up, and it went down to the bump stops. And I don't know if anyone of your listeners has ever driven a classic Range Rover with no air suspension, but literally it makes your teeth fall out. It is the most uncomfortable thing in the world. You're literally bouncing around the place, and it looks like it's a low rider. It looks like it's been slammed because the wheels are right under the arches. It's still drivable, but it's just like unbelievably uncomfortable.
Bone cruncher.
Real bone cruncher. So
it's funny because when that car launched, it was real sort of bit of a revolutionary moment, wasn't it? I guess I can't think of anything else that was like that. Trendsetter.
Yeah, I guess in '72 when the first Range Rover came out, it was a pretty agricultural thing. Yeah, the really early Range Rovers were this big shift. It was essentially not far off a Land Rover. Then you look in the like late 80s, 90s when they kind of upgraded it, became a real luxury vehicle. Very comfortable, automatic gearbox, all the kind of more cons. Essentially, I guess they were competing with the likes of Bentley really in the end, things like that. If you were affluent businessman or businesswoman in the early 90s, do you get a Bentley or do you get a Range Rover? And I guess the whole SUV obsession these days probably has all come about from the Range Rover, which is kind of interesting.
The Royals, they were a fan, weren't they, of the old Rangers? I think. Yeah,
I think the rumor was their favorite Range Rovers are the L322s, which actually has my everyday car, which I quite like. But again, they're not known for their reliability. But again, it's masochistic interest. Yeah.
Fantastic. What is it you race, Charles?
So I have a little Austin Healey, an Austin Healey Sebring Sprite. So it's a specially bodied, essentially a Frog Eye Sprite. And in fact, it's quite a nice story in that my father had the ex-works car, which in Period and Sebring in 1961 was co-driven by Sterling Moss and his sister Pat Moss.
Okay.
At Sebring. And then he had that car. And when I was 17, it came with an original body, which was put on when it got rolled at the Nürburgring, I think 1963. And when it got restored, that original body got taken off the car. When I was 17, I started restoring it with another car with the original body from when it got rolled at the Nürburgring. It took me 5 years to restore it and build it. I've still got it now. I did it literally school holidays, my gap year, university holidays. It took me 5 years and finished it. And anyway, ever since then, I've raced that car. And the nice thing to kind of tie in the story of Sterling and Pat Moss, brother and sister, was back probably in 2015 or 16, my sister and I co-drove the same car, actually my father's car, which is the ex-works car, at Le Mans, brother and sister team, tying in with Pat and Sterling Moss back in 61. So there's a little bit of history repeating itself there. But I love, those small engine cars like the Sprite. What I like about all the parts are quite inexpensive. It's quite easy to run. And actually, if you can drive a Sprite or something like a Sprite fast, you can drive anything fast on track. So I've raced a bunch of other cars. I used to race from Corvette, a 1962 Corvette, a Cobra, some pre-war stuff. But actually, all the stuff I've learned has been hustling an Austin Healey Sprite or an MG Midget or something like that, which is a small engine, not a huge amount of power, narrow wheelbase. It's always quite twitchy, very narrow power band. If you can hustle that around a circuit effectively, when you've got a big V8, the Cobra's producing 460 horsepower, okay, you're going a bit quicker, but you've got power to save the day. And if you make a little mistake, you can use the power to get out of it. Whereas a Sprite, if you make a mistake in a corner, you don't carry the speed, you're paying the price for the rest of the straight. Like it's actually a problem. So I think if any of your listeners are wanting to get into historic racing, and I'd be very privileged to have the opportunity to do it, I really recommend something like a Midget, MG Midget, or an Austin Healey Sprite. It's a great way, really nice people, not create, obviously any sort of racing, unfortunately, is pretty expensive, not a cheap undertaking, but actually comparatively, you can get all the parts and you can have a huge amount of fun with something like that. Even, mine's 1293, so 1.3 litre. And I've embarrassed some much more powerful equipment, particularly around the bends, just because it's so light, 600 kilos, 120 horsepower, and it's a lot of fun. And again, it's all around community. Part of the passion around racing for me is such nice people, and actually, what I like about it at the circuit, it doesn't really matter what your background is, what your car is. You're all on track together. It doesn't matter if you've got a £1 million Bugatti or a £5,000 MG. You have that shared passion. Everyone kind of chips in and helps out. So it's good fun.
Is that something you've done with your father? Is it the racing?
Yeah, so I guess I did my race license when I was 17, and for the first few years we used to co-drive in his car whilst I was still building my one. Yeah, and it's nice having the intergenerational shared passion, and actually having my sister also racing an event where all three of us co-drove at Le Mans again, probably back in 2015. I think it's quite nice to kind of have a shared interest with your dad. Yeah, and actually his father, who I never met, he was born in 1888, weirdly. And he had my father when he was 59 years old, which was, again, pretty unprecedented back in the day. But he worked for Lord Austin. So he did the body work for a lot of the Austin Sevens that raced at Brooklands in the 1920s. And so people like Kay Peter, who raced them in period. So there's that, his interest in cars. In fact, I don't think he was a really big car guy, but he worked in the kind of automotive space, passed my father, passed them to me. And if I, hopefully one day I have kids, hopefully one of them will be interested in cars and I can indoctrinate them with this passion as well.
Pass on the baton.
Yeah,
absolutely. Absolutely.
If we're allowed to still drive petrol cars at that point in time, who knows? Maybe we'll be stuck in electric stuff.
Yeah, hopefully not.
Who knows? I'm sure if we are stuck in electric stuff, someone will make some really fun electric cars, which I'm sure they would exist already. I've just never driven them.
Yeah, I think there's companies going that way, isn't there? Kind of Lotus and sort of companies along those sort of lines who are trying to find the fun with the electric, which it's got that instant power, isn't it? You've just got to tune it in and bolt it onto kind of a dynamic chassis and create something that people want to connect with.
Yeah, I think speed and power, because it's always exciting. I guess my issue with a lot of electric cars is the longevity.
Yeah.
I love the fact that I've got a 100-year-old Vauxhall, 1923, and it's still original chassis, original gearbox, original engine, original body.
Wow.
It's 100 years old. And I just look at some of these electric cars with the battery technology, and it's like, is this going to be around? Is it going to work in 20 years' time, 30 years' time? Will it be around in 50 years' time? Certainly not 100 years' time. So I like the idea of the longevity of these vehicles instead of them being, you use them for 10 years, scrap them, 10 years, scrap them.
Yeah.
I like the idea of something which lasts 100 years. I don't think that's necessarily the case with electric cars.
I don't know what we're going to do with these batteries either once the cars are finished. It's not just something you can, crush, is it? It's it's quite a major recycling job.
Yeah, I guess it's one thing. I'm all for the kind of ecological benefits of it. And I think I personally quite like the idea of hydrogen. But yeah, I think it's very easy to get focused on kind of emissions, but actually you can look at the broader spectrum of what's the environmental impact of, for instance, electric cars and some of the mining that takes place to get the resources for electric. I'm not knowledgeable enough to have a view on this really, but I think that people need to look at the holistic, long-term approach. For instance, one of my dreams, which I'm sure will never become a reality, would be to set up a car company where it's a modular idea. You buy a car from whatever this car company is going to be called, and we say to you, we will make sure you can use this car for 50 years. It's basically most of your kind of life. And, say in 5-10 years time, the technology develops and it's better gearbox technology. Because it's modular, you'll take out the old gearbox, put the new gearbox in, or say the styles change. It's a modular body, you change the style, put on a different body. Or say you suddenly have a family, instead of being a 2-seater, you can change the specification to a 4-seater. Or suspension technology changes, it gets modular, you take off the cars. But I like the idea of a car for your life or car for 50 years, where actually it's more like a subscription and it evolves over time as technology changes. Obviously, that's a massive change in philosophy compared to the current system where they just try to sell you more and more new cars. They don't want cars to last because it doesn't make economic sense for them to last. They want them to be really good for a certain period of time and then actually become almost defunct. So you have to buy another one.
Yeah.
But I think true environmental, sustainable motoring, in my opinion, is this long-term ownership or long-term use of something. For instance, this 100-year-old Vauxhall I've got. It's all the manufacturing effort has been spread, and the environmental impact of that manufacturing has been spread over 100 years. Yeah. So the contribution per year is going to be negligible. Whereas something which has a lifespan of 15 years, it's condensed into 15 years. But again, obviously big companies don't think like that. They just want to sell more cars. So it'll probably never happen. If anyone's listening to this and wants to go and do it, you can steal my idea. Go and do it and make the world a better place for motoring.
What's the story with the Vauxhall? What made you get into a vehicle that we've kind of spoken to people before about the concerns of sort of, I guess, people of our generation maybe not being influenced by vehicles so old because, generally speaking, we've only ever seen one at a vintage car rally or at Bewley or something like that. So what made you get into a vehicle like that?
Weirdly, the older I get, the more I like these weird niches. And I think it's one of those things where I had a few friends that had some pre-war cars, and I ended up getting involved with the Vintage Sports Car Club, which is like, sort of club for pre-war stuff. And I suddenly realized, actually, driving a 100-year-old car, even though, some of my friends say, why on earth you bought this 100-year-old car? It's must be so slow, so boring. I can tell you, driving something like that, where every gear change, if you get it right, you don't crush the gearbox, is like a massive achievement. It's got no front wheel brakes. It's only got rear wheel brakes. It's got it's got a transmission brake, which I don't use. It wears out the transmission. So I basically use the handbrake to slow down. And when you're driving that at 50 miles per hour, it feels like you're doing 150 because if someone brakes in front of you, you're going to hit the back of them. You're constantly having to think. And I think for me, the enjoyment of any car is if you're using your brain, you're really engaging with it. Speed is sort of secondary. to, are you getting the most out of that vehicle? And so I love pre-war stuff. I love the variety of it. I like the engineering. I like the when you look at something, it's not working, you're like, okay, you can kind of work out what's broken. Whereas obviously modern cars with all the electrics, if something goes wrong, you've got no chance of guessing what's wrong. You've got to plug it into the computer system that says there's some fault here and there. So, and I just think that the speed at which cars developed in the pre-war era is kind of fascinating. If you think, from horse and carriage to some of those veteran cars where they almost have like a tiller, like a boat.
Yeah.
And when you look at the London to Brighton run, and then suddenly, for instance, my box, which is 1923, the pedals in the same position, accelerator, brake, clutch.
Yeah.
The gear stick is inverse. So you've got first, second, third, fourth, going from right to left, not left to right. It's got a handbrake. And that happened all in not a huge amount of time, from literally tillers to what we still use today in the 1920s. Late teens, 20s. So, and also the other thing I love about pre-war stuff is that there's some unbelievably eccentric people that hang out in that world. I think the more eccentric the owner of a car, the more interesting they typically are. 1923 is the earliest I've gone to date. I don't know if I'll ever get into the veteran where you're doing about 5 miles per hour, but who knows?
Yeah.
Maybe if you speak to me in a few years' time, I'll be going 6 miles per hour in some really old, slow thing. Hopefully with a smile on my face.
When did Vauxhall launch? Is that one of their earliest sort of vehicles from Vauxhall?
Yeah, they did the Prince Henry was even earlier than that. I think they were, I want to say like 19. I think they're even pre
1908 is in my head, but I don't know whether.
I think they're even older than that. I think they were actually around in the late 1800s. But I think some of the really early cars, certainly the most well-known one in the pre-war era is the 1398, which was
1857 apparently.
There we go.
Vauxhall Motors founded in 1857.
Yeah,
you could go way back then, Charles.
Yeah, I know. There's plenty of years to get earlier.
Our first car rolled off the production line 1903. So it was maybe they were doing something, or maybe horse and carts or something before.
It's amazing, actually, in that era, in the sort of turn of the century, the number of car manufacturers that were there. A lot of them obviously don't exist anymore, but all quirky stuff. I guess a lot of them came out of the carriage makers.
Yeah.
And they're making other stuff, and then they suddenly realised there was an opportunity and came into cars.
The whole idea of your sort of modular thing sort of harks back to like coach builders, doesn't it? In a way, where you have a chassis and then you take it to the coach builder and they'll build you a sports saloon or a coupe or a cabriolet or a roadster or whatever. And I guess you've seen a little bit of that with sort of the platform type things for electric cars and things. But yeah, it does go back to that kind of coach building era.
Yeah. And I actually think the other really interesting point about that concept is if you look at the cars that maintain their value long term. So for instance, Land Rover Defenders, a 40-year-old, 50-year-old Land Rover Defender is still quite a valuable car because it's easy to maintain.
Yeah.
Whereas if you've got something which is super complicated and the overhead of actually running it becomes so detrimental to the value of the car, it becomes unpractical. So actually, there's a lot to be said, in my opinion, for something modular, but also simple, not overly engineered. I think electrics is a big ticking time bomb for a lot of these modern cars because, it's like your phones or your iPods, they work great for a few years, but then are they going to work in 20 years' time? Or even if they do work, the speed would have been massively decreased. And, if you've got, I don't want to pick a particular brand, but if you've got an electric car now, in 30 years' time, if some ECU starts packing up and there's some electrical gremlins, how are you going to repair that practically? It's going to be a bit of a challenge. So I think there's a lot to be said for use like super modern technology of engineering, try and limit the actual electrics. So it's something which has longevity, make it easy to maintain and run over a long period of time. And actually you'll save a lot on depreciation.
Yeah.
There'll be a second-hand market for those vehicles. So I think Land Rover Defenders are a great case in point where it's easy to upgrade, easy to run. I just recently bought a 1983, I think it is, Land Rover Defender, one of the really early ones, a County with a V8, and it's just so basic. And when I look at it, I don't freak out thinking this thing's going to break and cost me a fortune because it's just so rudimentary. And I love that. I think there's a lot to be said for that.
I think we're in this sort of period now, aren't we, where as an end user and a buyer of a new car that's electric, say, there's a real sort of unknown, isn't there, in terms of what the future holds for that ownership over the, like you say, Charles, the next 10, 20 years, if you intend to keep it that long. It's all a little bit sort of clouded, isn't it? I mean, like I say, in terms of a battery and stuff like that, what happens with that over time? Is it going to degrade quickly? What happens to it when it completely fails? And where do you take it? It's all just a bit of an unknown, I think.
Yeah. No, I think actually for classic car movement, the car community more generally, I think as these cars become more like white goods, the passion for the older stuff and the more quirky stuff, I think will only grow.
Yeah.
Because it'll end up being this experience which you can't get with a modern car. I love all the stuff which is up to about the 90s, where it didn't become all about the electrics and computer systems. It's all quite analog. I love all the analog stuff. Probably up to like an F40, something like that, but it's still analog thrills.
Yeah. I think you see sort of the lifespan of a vehicle, and they depreciate, and then they get to that dip, and then they can start coming up the other side. And with the modern cars, is there enough charm to kind of bring them out the other side? I've got a Porsche 944 for argument's sake, and when they were £1,000, at least potentially you could have spanned it yourself rather than paying £500 at the garage to get something fixed. Whereas now, actually, if you've got maybe even like an Audi TT, for example, you can buy one for £1,000, but you've got to have the computer to plug it in to get it fixed. Otherwise, you're in for £1,000 bill at Audi, and what's the point?
Yeah.
Have they got enough charm just to sort of get them out of that dip?
Yeah.
To then obviously carry them back up into sort of the classic status and let their value go up. And I suppose, with the electric cars, potentially not. And with a lot of other vehicles, potentially not.
Yeah. No, I think it's a really interesting point. I think I love buying a car which has had a horrendous depreciation. It's flattening out, and I was looking at some car the other day. It's done like 20,000 miles, and a person put it new, just taking brutal depreciation. It was like 30% of the value, and that's exactly the point I want to buy it, because some poor person has taken 70% of the depreciation. I can now enjoy it, not feeling guilty that every mile I'm chucking like £10 out the window for some depreciation. And actually, at 20,000 miles, it's still, in my eyes, virtually a new car.
Yeah.
So,
I guess, obviously, with the Custodian platform and the marketplace, are you privy to things which come in and you sort of have a flip through that and you're like, actually, maybe I won't put that one live. I might just give that chap a call myself.
Yeah, so currently we work with just with partner dealers.
Okay.
So we have 38, I think, and every week it's growing, partner dealers. So we have supercar dealers, classic car dealers, all sorts of kind of dealers. In the future, we'll open it up to actually our users, where they can sell direct to each other.
Okay. Yeah.
That's something we want to do. I think at the initial stages, we want to make sure that we kind of set the vibe of the marketplace. We've got initial traction. But every day I'm definitely guilty, or certainly every couple of days, just peeking there, what's come to market this week. It's one of the things, like, even though I definitely don't have capacity or the funds to buy a new toy, I can't help myself. It's that that looks quite nice. And then you start reading the history, see a few photos, you're clicking the button to inquire, and no. I do not want to be buying
this is going to get me in trouble.
But it's a bit of an addiction, these old cars. And I think the more you get into it, the more you realize how much you haven't experienced and you want to experience. So it's this never-ending cycle. I think that's why I've gone to these really old cars, the pre-war stuff, because I kind of did the 60s cars and the 50s cars, and I was like, what else is there to do? And I was like, 1920s and 30s, that's a whole new world. And then I've done that, and then I'm looking at these veteran cars doing London to Brighton. I was like, God, that looks quite fun. But the one bit I haven't got into, which I really wanted, is like the more the kind of modified modern classics. I think there's some really cool stuff going on in that scene. Yeah. And actually some amazing people doing amazing work, and a really vibrant community built around it. So I'm definitely more on the crusty side, unfortunately, of the car passion. I need to quite to go, and places like Cafe Machine and places like that, they've built a real community around some of these different sub communities. Yeah,
definitely. I think they're doing great work, and there has been that growth of the sort of the community and the destination, isn't it? It was kind of headed up by places like Cafe and Machine and Goodwood as well, really just bringing everyone together and shining a light on, I guess, the more unusual or the older stuff.
Yeah. I think the other thing I find amazing is that we had a stand at the NEC Classic Motor Show with Custodian a few weeks ago, and you walk around some of the car club stands, and there's literally a car club for the wackiest, nichest things. And there they've got 2 cars on display. I don't know how many members they've probably 50 members or something, wherever it is. But it is amazing how these essentially lumps of metal can bring people together. And I think there's a lot to be said for that in the community. I just hope that, other generations still have that community around cars. I worry that if cars become purely functional electric entities that take you from A to B, it's very hard to get passionate about that, and you don't build those communities, those ecosystems really of passionate people that can go on adventures, road trips, share their knowledge, share their expertise, share their passion with like-minded people.
Yeah.
I'm sure it won't happen. I'm sure there's always going to be enthusiasts, whatever the type of car that's being manufactured is, but it is amazing.
I suppose we're lucky we live in an age where, these different little tribes for certain cars or eras can get off the ground a bit easier nowadays, what with all the social media platforms, whereas before it might have just been, like a sort of niche magazine, mightn't it, in WH Smith's, and that's about all you could go on.
Yeah, well, I guess that's the beauty of the internet, and there's no end to the long tail of passion. There will be someone in the world that probably shares your passion, whatever it is.
Yeah.
I think it's a case of finding those people, finding your tribe or your community which you want to fit into. And again, that's one of the things that we're looking to do with Custodian in the future, is opening up a social element to it where, if you are, I don't know, Mazda MX-5 owner and you want to join the community, we can build some tooling where you can meet other people with similar cars. So you can go to events together. You can share the knowledge and expertise. One of the things that I often get is that friends of mine ring me up and they're like, "Oh, hey, Charles, I've just made a bit of money with my job. I'm thinking about buying a classic car, or do I buy like a modern performance car?" And they're like, "Well, if I bought an E-Type Jaguar, is it going to break down the whole time? Like, where do I have it maintained?" It's very hard if you don't have that existing network to know how to look after these vehicles. It's a hard ownership experience, and that's exactly what we're trying to achieve with Custodian. We're trying to make it more accessible to people that don't have that existing network. And for instance, in that situation, in the future, we want to do tooling where you can put in Jaguar E-Type. You can see all the other owners that have Jaguar E-Types in our community. You can then look which service providers they use, if they're willing to share that information, and you can then get that really deep insight into actually, who are the right service providers, who are the best people in the industry to help you with that ownership experience. So that's our longer term vision. We want to essentially capture all this collective knowledge and expertise in people's heads right now into a digital format so that it can be looked after. And I think there's actually a real obligation for people like myself, and probably you guys as well, to actually try and document some of this knowledge that we have. Because if we don't do that in 20, 50, 100 years time, how many people are going to be able to rebuild the gearbox or the engine on my 100-year-old Vauxhall? Probably no one. It's going to be a nightmare.
Yeah.
And it'll just mean that some of these niche cars, maybe not even that niche cars, become very difficult to look after. So I think if you truly care for the community, you truly care about the continuity of this passion to future generations, I do think there needs to be some digitalization process of all the abstract knowledge and expertise in people's heads into digital format. And that's one of the long-term aspirations and my passion really for Custodian is, how can we make this future-proof so that, people can still enjoy these 100, 120, 50, whatever the age is, cars for my kids, my grandkids, my great-grandkids for many generations to come. Because it's an important part of human heritage, fundamentally.
It's a central hub, isn't it? It's interesting, actually. I was chatting to a chap I work with. I work for a parts supplier for Volkswagen and Porsche and Land Rover parts. But it's an idea we'd thrown around, we throw a lot of ideas around the marketing department, but we kind of came up with this sort of concept, a bit like a Facebook for cars, and obviously connecting these things. And this is sort of the nearest, which is kind of ever... We've not really got the skills in-house to sort of do that. It's very easy to go, "Oh, how about a Facebook for cars?" But that's sort of what Custodian's kind of touching on, really.
Yeah, it's interesting. When we first came up with the idea, we were thinking about doing a more social platform, a bit like a Facebook for cars. But what we realised as well is that for us, it's all about trust. We make money through insurance, for example, but it's all about trusting us to look after quite sensitive information about your car and so on.
Yep.
And social media platforms, I think there's a very negative connotation around them. We never want to sell your data to anyone. We want to be, data should be your data, and you should be able to do whatever you want with it. It shouldn't be a third party's data to sell on. So that's why we didn't do the social element initially, but in the future we can. But what we do have, which is quite cool, is that we can transfer your car to a new owner through our platform. So say you have your 944 Porsche on our platform, and you've been very diligent. You've uploaded the invoices, you've photographed it all. You've been at Cafe Machine. You've documented all this and that. And when you come to sell the car, you can then do a digital transfer of that vehicle to the new owner.
Yeah.
And what's nice about that is that digital provenance of the vehicle is continued to the next owner. It stays with the car, and we call it a digital passport for a physical asset. Is the idea. And it's one of the things where if your house burns down or you get your, I don't know, something happens and you lose the physical history file, you've still got the digital backup, the digital passport through Custodian. Certainly, if people do put the effort into keeping digital documentation in the platform and you then buy the car, they're much more likely to kind of carry on the documentation. And as you know, there's a big difference between someone that's really cared for their car and kept all the documentation neatly ordered, and you can diligence it if you're looking to buy it, versus a car that hasn't got the documentation. You don't know what's been done. Okay, they might say that they've had it serviced every year and they've done everything, but unless you can see it, it's obviously the big question mark. And actually, the nice thing about what we're doing is that you can be in a different country. You don't even have to see the car. You can request to see all the digital documentation. In the comfort of your own home, on your phone, on your desktop or tablet. You can look through all the invoices that have been uploaded. You can say, do you know what, this has really been cared for. The guy's a good custodian, and actually it's worth me driving the 4 hours to go and see that car and potentially buy it. So we're just trying to bring that level of transparency to the market, which at the moment can be quite untransparent. It's quite opaque, to understand what's a good car and what's a bad car. Particularly when you look at Auto Trader and some of the other platforms, the photos can look great, but has it been properly looked after? And I think that's, our name is Custodian. We're a platform for custodians of their car. And I think people that do really care about them and look after them really well, they deserve to be rewarded with better insurance, which more competitive insurance is what we're looking to do, but also achieve a higher value for their car when they come to sell it. And at the moment, it's quite hard to distinguish between a good custodian and a bad custodian just on simple listings on a marketplace. We can provide that level of transparency.
Yeah.
Is it a platform, kind of spinning this bound to what we do, that someone could go on and search for registrations and things? Like my uncle, for example, has got a list of all of his parents' registration numbers for all like Morris Minors and things. Is that something someone can search on your database?
No. So again, all the data you add into the platform is completely private, unless you want to share it.
Yeah.
So we're very data security driven. So none of your data is visible to any external party unless you want to do a proactively share it to someone. So not at the moment. I think in the future it'd be more around what's the model that you have, and then finding other people that own a similar model, and you can then learn from their experiences and who they have their cars serviced by. Not a database where you can look up registration numbers. I think there are other platforms that will do something similar.
Yeah,
I think that'd be a really handy function, like you say, to have that sort of bank of people with the same vehicle. Because at the moment, if you've got an issue with your car, you go onto like a forum, don't you, or something, end up sort of sifting through, and then you might see sort of 2 or 3 different explanations for the issue you might be suffering with. So you don't really know what's what, do you? So, yeah.
Absolutely. That's a really good point, because often with these forums, it's not necessarily the most knowledgeable person that gives the most information. It's often the person that has the most time or is the most active that gets the most sway.
Yeah.
Whereas what we're looking to do is that, say you bought a Jaguar XK120 as an example, and you've never owned one before, you don't know anything about it. The best way of knowing where to look after it is if you then go onto Custodian, you can see there's 10 other Jaguar XK120 owners. You can then see all the companies they've used, and actually maybe there's functionality where they're willing to speak to you to give you advice. That is the best way, in my opinion, to know how to look after a car.
Yeah.
If I buy a new car and I've got a friend that's had one for 20 years, the first call I'm going to make is to him saying, hey, buddy, how am I going to look after this thing? Like, who do you recommend service-wise? And actually, the other interesting thing about service providers is often the companies that advertise the most. So if you go into Google and you put in Jaguar XK120, whatever it is, I've never done this, but the companies probably come up first aren't necessarily the best ones, because the best service providers are so busy, they don't need to market because they've got so much work anyway. And that's where that word of mouth element becomes so valuable. And actually, if we can digitalize that word of mouth network effect into our platform, I think it will make it incredibly valuable for owners looking to look after these cars long term. So that's something we're working on, and we'll be launching some sort of tooling next year in 2024.
Yeah, it sounds really exciting, and I'm kind of an ideas person. Obviously, I think you are as well. And the fact that you've got the capability to turn these ideas into reality is pretty exciting, really. Like, you've got the guys there who you can go, what if we do this? And they go, yeah, okay, probably not that quickly, but then there it is.
Yeah. Well, I definitely can't take credit. The engineering team, so Jeremy and Natalia, my 2 co-founders, they're the tech brains, and we've got an amazing engineering team. I would say this because I'm the co-founder, but I think they are genuinely world class, and it's very exciting. Where I come up with some idea where it's like, "God, this would be so cool to help me with my ownership," and they go, "Oh yeah, we can build that in like 2 weeks." I'm like, "Wow!" So it's pretty exciting. And actually, the other thing, for your listeners, is that we have something on our platform where you can suggest things you want us to build.
Yeah.
So if you go into our platform, you go up into the upcoming section. You can click a button, it goes into suggestions. I think we've had about 130 or 140 suggestions by our users, some of which are super good. You can upvote them. Some of them are pretty niche. Some of them are actually really helpful. So one of the ones that's been really upvoted is the idea that you put all the digital information about your vehicle, your invoices, documentation, and so on, and you can click a button and it'll produce a PDF, essentially like a book about your car.
Nice.
And that's something we want to do in the future. Something like that. And then there's quirky stuff around modifying cars, knowing which parts you've got on, which parts you don't have on. Almost turning it into a computer game, but for actual physical assets. But no, so if any of your listeners have some ideas, we would definitely welcome them, and we read and engage with all of them. And it's just a case of time. But we love any sort of suggestions. We're all ideas people. We're yes people, subject to obviously time and if it fits in what we can actually achieve.
I think that's important. We've found with the podcast that the more you include your community in the journey, the more you kind of get that sort of buy-in and support and all the rest. And people do feel like they're coming on that with you, and they've got a small sort of say in that sort of thing. So and it is all about having fun. So
absolutely, it's such a cliche term, and but it's that whole thing about like being an enthusiast, building for enthusiasts. It's so cliche, but I think if you genuinely have the pain point, you genuinely care about what you're doing, I think it does hopefully come across in the way we've engaged with people. And we love any suggestions.
Wonderful.
Also, critical suggestions. If you're like, "Oh, this is appalling, and you should do it X, Y, and Z way," still engage with that. If you're like, "Why would I use this? This is funky." We love any feedback, good or bad.
Fantastic. I think that's a great place to wrap it up. Thank you very much for joining us, Charles. It's been it's been a real pleasure.
Really enjoyed it. Thanks so much, Andy and John.
Thanks, Charles.
Take care. Bye.
Cool. There we go.
That was good, wasn't it?
Yeah, and obviously we've not had anyone sort of particularly from that background, and an interesting story. It's an interesting kind of app and concept, and he's got some nice tales as well, some cool stuff.
Yeah, it's interesting to get the it's not for the first time, the sort of take on where cars are going with the modern route. Obviously, someone that's a lover of the older style stuff. It's interesting the bit when Charles mentioned everything he kind of likes in his Vauxhall is what people don't look for nowadays in terms of you have to think about everything, whereas nowadays the modern stuff you jump in, you don't have to think about anything. It's just literally about the speed of getting from A to B, isn't it, really?
Yeah. Someone wants a car with an Apple badge on it. That's basically it, isn't it?
Yeah. God, could be onto something there.
And you just plug it in at night, jump in it, and job done.
And then you can't charge it because the socket breaks or something like that.
But you have to have the specific Apple socket, obviously.
You need to get the pad. You just rest the car on it and it charges without plugging it in.
Yeah, absolutely.
But no, I really like.
And then the screen breaks.
Exactly. Yeah. You have to take it to a sort of a little hut in between two shops in the high street, and a man fixes it for 20 quid.
Yeah, miraculously it's sorted.
Yeah. But no, I was going to say, I think we both agree that if any of our listeners haven't already checked out the Custodian app, it's really good. I definitely think it must be a huge benefit if you're selling your car.
Yeah, definitely.
If you've got it all sort of readily available to view via a link, you can just pass it over to someone that's obviously not a fraud, then what's not to like?
I think if you've gone to the effort of doing that, that does kind of show you're a certain type of person, isn't it? That's, I guess, the equivalent. I've had friends who have bought cars and like the previous owners recorded every mileage for every petrol fill up. And that's probably a little bit extreme, but
call the police. Yeah.
But check his cellar. But if you've gone to the effort of uploading your details onto kind of an app, such as Custodian, I think that's the only one that does it. Then you're a certain kind of type of owner who has been diligent and has looked after it and has bothered to kind of preserve that history for the future owner, which can then be passed on, which is very clever.
It could definitely be the difference between someone that lives, like Charles mentioned, 4 hours away from a car that they've seen on an advert. It could be the difference between them going to make that journey and not, really, couldn't it? Yeah.
There you go. And if we go back to the parents' cars, which obviously we did touch on those and we sort of got sidetracked on the wonders of Custodian, really, but travelling in the back of the Ferrari.
And the Range Rover, yeah.
and the Range Rover, and then the Bristol, which sort of exploded outside the shop.
Yeah. That's quite a story, isn't it? Quite sad, to be honest. The sad demise of a lovely Bristol.
Yeah, especially 20 years or so in the family, and then that happened. And then I guess racing at Le Mans with his sister and his father. Wow, that's
Yeah.
obviously not everyone gets to do that, but that's pretty cool, isn't it?
Definitely another strongly influenced sort of petrol head feel, isn't there? Going back, obviously, generations.
Yeah.
A couple of generations back.
Definitely. Really good, really enjoyable.
Yeah.
Fantastic. We'll leave it there. Thank you very much, John.
Many thanks. Roll the credits.
Thank you for listening to My Dad's Car. I hope you enjoyed the show. Please support us. Buy us a coffee and subscribe. And tell all your friends.